the great Leonardo da Vinci. Properly named Leonardo di Ser Piero da Vinci, Leonardo, son of Ser Piero from Vinci, was born on the 15th of April 1452 in, or close to, the Tuscan hill town of Vinci, 20 miles from Florence. He was born out of wedlock to Piero da Vinci, Ser Piero da Vinci d'Antonio di Ser Piero di Ser Guido, 1426 to 1504, a Florentine legal notary, and Caterina di Milippi, c. 1434 to 1494, from the lower class. It remains uncertain where Leonardo was born. The traditional account, from a local oral tradition recorded by the historian Emanuele Repetti, is that he was born in Anciano, a country hamlet that would have offered sufficient privacy for the illegitimate birth, though it is still possible he was born in a house in Florence that Ser Piero almost certainly had. Leonardo's parents both married separately the year after his birth. Caterina, who later appears in Leonardo's notes as only Caterina or Catalina, is usually identified as the Caterina Beauty del Vacca, who married the local artisan Antonio di Piero Beauty del Vacca, nicknamed El Acatabriga, the quarrelsome one. Ser Piero married Elvira Amadori, having been betrothed to her the previous year, and after her death in 1464, went on to have 3 subsequent marriages. From all the marriages, Leonardo eventually had 16 half-siblings, of whom 11 survived infancy, who were much younger than he. The last was born when Leonardo was 46 years old, and with whom he had very little contact. Very little is known about Leonardo's childhood, and much is shrouded in myth, partially because of his biography in the frequently apocryphal lives of the most excellent painters, sculptors, and architects. 1550 by 16th century art historian Giorgio Vasari. Tax records indicate that by at least 1457 he lived in the household of his paternal grandfather, Antonio da Vinci, but it is possible that he spent the years before then in the care of his mother in Vinci, either in Ciano or Campo Zeppi in the parish of San Pantaleone. He is thought to have been close to his uncle, Francesco da Vinci, but his father was probably in Florence most of the time. Ser Piero, who was the descendant of a long line of notaries, established an official residence in Florence by at least 1469 and had a successful career. Despite his family history, Leonardo only received a basic and informal education in vernacular writing, reading, and mathematics. Possibly because his artistic talents were recognized early, so his family decided to focus their attention there. Later in life, Leonardo recorded his earliest memory, now in the Codex Atlanticus. While riding on the flight of birds, he recalled as an infant when a kite came to his cradle and opened his mouth with its tail. Commentators still debate whether the anecdote was an actual memory or a fantasy. In the mid-1460s, Leonardo's family moved to Florence, which at the time was the center of Christian humanist thought and culture. Around the age of 14, he became a garzone studio boy in the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, who was the leading Florentine painter and sculptor of his time. This was about the time of the death of Verrocchio's master, the great sculptor Donatello. Leonardo became an apprentice by the age of 17 and remained in training for 7 years. Other famous painters apprenticed in the workshop or associated with it include Ghirlandaio, Perugino, Botticelli, and Lorenzo di Credi. Leonardo was exposed to both theoretical training and a wide range of technical skills, including drafting, chemistry, metallurgy, metalworking, plaster casting, leather working, mechanics, and woodwork, as well as the artistic skills of drawing, painting, sculpting, and modeling. Leonardo was a contemporary of Botticelli, Ghirlandaio and Perugino, who were all slightly older than he was. He would have met them at the workshop of Verrocchio or at the Platonic Academy of the Medici. Florence was ornamented by the works of artists such as Donatello's contemporaries Masaccio, whose figurative frescoes were imbued with realism and emotion, and Ghiberti, whose Gates of Paradise, gleaming with gold leaf, displayed the art of combining complex figure compositions with detailed architectural backgrounds. Piero della Francesca had made a detailed study of perspective, and was the first painter to make a scientific study of light. These studies in Leon Battista Alberti's treatise De Pictura were to have a profound effect on younger artists, and in particular on Leonardo's own observations in artworks. Much of the painting in Verrocchio's workshop was done by his assistants. According to Vasari, Leonardo collaborated with Verrocchio on his The Baptism of Christ, c. 1472 to 1475, painting the young angel holding Jesus' robe with skill so far superior to his masters that Verrocchio purportedly put down his brush and never painted again, the latter claim probably being apocryphal. The new technique of oil paint was applied to areas of the mostly tempera work, including the landscape, the rocks seen through the brown mountain stream, and much of Jesus' figure, indicating Leonardo's hand. Additionally, Leonardo may have been a model for two works by Verrocchio, the bronze statue of David in the Bargello and the Archangel Raphael in Tobias and the Angel. Vasari tells a story of Leonardo as a very young man. A local peasant made himself a round buckler shield and requested that Ser Piero have it painted for him. Leonardo, inspired by the story of Medusa, responded with a painting of a monster spitting fire that was so terrifying that his father bought a different shield to give to the peasant and sold Leonardo's to a Florentine art dealer for 100 ducats, who in turn sold it to the Duke of Milan. Leonardo worked in Milan from 1482 until 1499. He was commissioned to paint the Virgin of the Rocks for the Confraternity of the Immaculate Conception and the Last Supper for the Monastery of Santa Maria del Grazie. In the spring of 1485, Leonardo traveled to Hungary on behalf of Sforza to meet King Matthias Corvinus, and was commissioned by him to paint a Madonna. In 1490 he was called as a consultant, together with Francesco di Giorgio Martini, for the building site of the Cathedral of Pavia, and was struck by the equestrian statue of Regisol, of which he left a sketch. Leonardo was employed on many other projects for Sforza, such as preparation of floats and pageants for special occasions. A drawing of, and wooden model for, a competition to design the cupola for Milan Cathedral. And a model for a huge equestrian monument to Ludovico's predecessor Francesco Sforza. This would have surpassed in size the only two large equestrian statues of the Renaissance, Donatello's Gattamelata in Padua and Verrocchio's Bartolomeo Colleoni in Venice, and became known as the Gran Cavallo. Leonardo completed a model for the horse and made detailed plans for its casting, but in November 1494, Ludovico gave the medal to his brother-in-law to be used for a cannon to defend the city from Charles VIII of France. Contemporary correspondence records that Leonardo and his assistants were commissioned by the Duke of Milan to paint the Sala dell'As in the Sforza Castle, c. 1498. The project became a trompe-l'oeil decoration that made the Great Hall appear to be a pergola created by the interwoven limbs of 16 mulberry trees, whose canopy included an intricate labyrinth of leaves and knots on the ceiling. The great Leonardo da Vinci. When Ludovico Sforza was overthrown by France in 1500, Leonardo fled Milan for Venice, accompanied by his assistant Sicilian friend, the mathematician Luca Pacioli. In Venice, Leonardo was employed as a military architect and engineer, devising methods to defend the city from naval attack. On his return to Florence in 1500, He and his household were guests of the Servite monks at the monastery of Santissima Annunziata and were provided with a workshop where, according to Vasari, Leonardo created the Cartoon of the Virgin and Child with Saint Anne and Saint John the Baptist, a work that won such admiration that men and women, young and old, flocked to see it as if they were going to a solemn festival. In Cesena in 1502, Leonardo entered the service of Cesare Borgia, the son of Pope Alexander VI, acting as a military architect and engineer and traveling throughout Italy with his patron. Leonardo created a map of Cesare Borgia's stronghold, a town plan of Imola in order to win his patronage. Upon seeing it, Cesare hired Leonardo as his chief military engineer and architect. Later in the year, Leonardo produced another map for his patron, one of Chana Valley, Tuscany, so as to give his patron a better overlay of the land and greater strategic position. He created this map in conjunction with his other project of constructing a dam from the sea to Florence, in order to allow a supply of water to sustain the canal during all seasons. Leonardo had left Borgia's service and returned to Florence early, where he rejoined the Guild of St. Luke on the 18th of October of that year. By this same month, Leonardo had begun working on a portrait of Lisa del Giocondo, the model for the Mona Lisa, which he would continue working on until his twilight years. In January 1504, he was part of a committee formed to recommend where Michelangelo's statue of David should be placed. He then spent 2 years in Florence designing and painting a mural of the Battle of Anghiari for the Signoria, with Michelangelo designing its companion piece, the Battle of Cascina. In 1506, Leonardo was summoned to Milan by Charles II d'Amboise, the acting French governor of the city. There, Leonardo took on another pupil, Count Francesco Melzi, the son of a Lombard aristocrat, who is considered to have been his favorite student. The Council of Florence wished Leonardo to return promptly to finish the Battle of Anghiari, but he was given leave at the behest of Louis XII, who considered commissioning the artist to make some portraits. Leonardo may have commenced a project for an equestrian figure of d'Amboise. A wax model survives and, if genuine, is the only extant example of Leonardo's sculpture. Leonardo was otherwise free to pursue his scientific interests. Many of Leonardo's most prominent pupils either knew or worked with him in Milan, including Bernardino Luini, Giovanni Antonio Boltraffio, and Marco Dogano. In 1507, Leonardo was in Florence sorting out a dispute with his brothers over the estate of his father, who had died in 1504. By 1508, Leonardo was back in Milan, living in his own house in Porta Orientale in the parish of Santa Babila. In 1512, Leonardo was working on plans for an equestrian monument for Gian Giacomo Trivulzio, but this was prevented by an invasion of a confederation of Swiss, Spanish and Venetian forces, which drove the French from Milan. Leonardo stayed in the city, spending several months in 1513 at the Medici's Vaprio de Villa. Followed Leonardo's casket. Melzi was the principal heir and executor, receiving, as well as money, Leonardo's paintings, tools, library and personal effects. Leonardo's other longtime pupil and companion, Soleil, and his servant Baptista de Villanis, each received half of Leonardo's vineyards. His brothers received land, and his serving woman received a fur-lined cloak. On the 12th of August 1519, Leonardo's remains were interred in the Collegiate Church of St. Florentin at the Château d'Amboise. Some 20 years after Leonardo's death, Francis was reported by the goldsmith and sculptor Benvenuto Cellini as saying, "There had never been another man born in the world who knew as much as Leonardo, not so much about painting, sculpture and architecture, as that he was a very great philosopher." Soleil, or Illinois Solano, the little unclean one, that is, the devil, entered Leonardo's household in 1490 as an assistant. After only a year, Leonardo made a list of his misdemeanors, calling him a thief, a liar, stubborn, and a glutton, after he had made off with money and valuables on at least 5 occasions and spent a fortune on clothes. Nevertheless, Leonardo treated him with great indulgence, and he remained in Leonardo's household for the next 30 years. Sale executed a number of paintings under the name of Andrea Sale, but although Vasari claims that Leonardo taught him many things about painting, his work is generally considered to be of less artistic merit than others among Leonardo's pupils, such as Marco Dogino and Boltraffio. At the time of his death in 1524, Sale owned a painting referred to as Gioconda in a posthumous inventory of his belongings. It was assessed at 505 lire, an exceptionally high valuation for a small panel portrait. The great Leonardo da Vinci, in the Book of History.